So today's game is called Knock Off the Clock. It is a great game, and we can, like the other games that we've played before, we can take this from pre-K all the way up to 5th grade. It's best played with 2 players, and the beautiful part about it is all you actually need is dice. We're going to show you some modifications for that, but essentially you need dice and you need the clock face. The 2 goals that we're going to be working on are fluency, and then we'll work on that mathematical practice of precision. So we're going to remind ourselves that it's important for us to develop concrete, pictorial, abstract delivery, and that at any point we can go back to the concrete and provide concrete support for our students. So with our youngest learners, one of the things that we can do is we can get out actual manipulatives. This would be for our pre-K students or our students that are at that pre-K level. And as we roll the dice, we can look for numbers of those actual items. So we're just working with fluency within 1, 2, and 3. So if they rolled a 3, they could take those 3 dogs. If they rolled a 1, there's nothing on here that is just 1. If they rolled a 2, they could take those 2 footballs, and they just work on one-to-one correspondence with actual items. So continuing with that same idea, this is for our young learners. We're going to take a look at just some pictorial representation after we've moved from those actual items, and students can turn over a card and then they can cover something that has 3 items. So if I have 3 items, I might cover up this and knock that off of my game board. If I turn over 1 card, I might knock that off of something that has just 1 item. And I'm just looking for that connection between leading up to being able to knock off numbers. As it progresses through, we can do what we did with our other games. We can start to look at dot patterns for students to be able to make connections with. We can start to use our 5 frames for students to make those connections as they look for items on our board. We can also start to move into numbers and getting students to look for those items on our board that have to do with numbers. So we can then modify the face to become more clock-like. So on my clock, I do have 12 as the top of my clock, and I do have 1, 2, 3 with dot patterns. So again, students can turn over a dot pattern and they can cover up a 5, and they can find 5 on their clock and be able to turn that over. Same thing with 2, and I can look for 2 on my clock and I can cover up my 2. I can also take it and I can start to use some subitizing dice and roll my dice and try to find the number that I'm covering up with that 4. So I can either use my dot cards or I can use my dot dice as I progress through the grade levels. So next up, I can take that same face of the clock and I can find where is my 12? Well, here's my group of 10 and 2 1s. And so I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to turn over potentially some 10 frame cards. And so I might turn over the number 11 and I'm going to go ahead and cover my number 11. Or I might turn over the number 4 and I can cover my number 4. And I continue on and I can progress into numbers. I can also progress into dice that have numbers on them. I can go back to my subitizing dice to look for those connections on my clock face. So the traditional version of the game as it's originally intended, is where I'm going to work on fluency and precision, and I'm going to be using my regular 2 dice. So I am going to roll my 2 dice, and I can either add those 2 dice or I can subtract those dice. So in this case, I have a 1 and a 4. I could make that a 5, and I could cross off 5 on my clock, or I could look at this and think of it as 4 minus 1, which is 3, so I could cross off 3 on my clock. My objective is to try to get all of my numbers on my clock knocked off in the least amount of rolls using fluency. So as I continue to gear this up, I can roll 2 dice and I can now add in addition, subtraction, multiplication, and even beginning division. So as I move up the grade levels, I can also start to use more multiplication and division. So in this case, instead of adding or subtracting these numbers, I could look at this as 5 groups of 2, and I would be able to cross 10 off of my clock. If I had a roll of 6 instead, I could think about 6 divided by 2, and I would be able to cross off 3 if it weren't already crossed off on my clock. So I can use multiplication, division, or I can open it up for addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So as we move up the grade levels, we can provide an additional challenge by adding in a third dice and starting to use some grouping symbols and the associative property. So I could take my dice and arrange them to help me make sense of a number I need to knock off. So in this case, I might look at 6 plus 4, and I might group that. And then I am going to minus 3. So 6 plus 4 gives me 10, subtract 3 gives me the answer of 7. I can use those same 3 dice in a different way to think about that as possibly 3 plus 4, which would give me 7, and 7 minus 6 is going to give me the answer of 1. So in one case, I could cross off 7, or if I use the other sentence, I can cross off 1, with the objective being trying to knock off all numbers on my clock. So as we play a game like Knock Off the Clock, we're going to think about how we can gear it up and how we can gear it down. So we can start down with our pre-K and we can work with actual items and small numbers. We can move into kindergarten and start to work with larger numbers with subitizing and 10 frames. We can start to move into first and second grade with adding and subtracting, up into third grade with addition, subtraction, and multiplication using 2 dice. And then we can move into fourth and fifth grade using all operations of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and moving into our grouping symbols. So we can move up and down across that continuum as we need to, and we can bring in manipulatives at any point to provide that concrete support for our students. So to make this more than just a game and to make it an instructional tool, we want to ensure that while we're playing the game, we focus in on what our objectives are, that we ask students questions while we're navigating around the room while they're playing, and some questions we can ask are, tell me more, show me, and why are you correct? We also know that targeted specific feedback is beneficial to students. So while they're playing, we can give them very specific feedback. You worked hard on your addition facts today. You persevered when you weren't sure if you should add or you should subtract to cross something off the clock. Your effort was amazing when you used the associative property playing with 3 dice today.